World of Horror is a, well, horror game that plays a lot like a tabletop game. The biggest strength of the game is absolutely the visuals. The audio is okay, and the gameplay has some issues that I'll get into later. This video is being made pre-1.0, but the game is a roguelite, so most of the concepts I talk about should, in theory, be the same when the game releases in October. If the game does change a ton in 2 months, then oh well. With all that said, I think the game currently has enough content to justify me talking about it. So, let's begin. On a technical level, this game really isn't much. It's all done in MS Paint, so if you're looking for something more graphically advanced than a Game Boy Color, you're out of luck. Where the visuals really truly shine is the art style. It looks like something Junji Ito would make, but crunchier. That's a given, of course, because he's one of the main inspirations for this game. Look, here he is in the game. Just, be careful what you click on. The game can have some unnerving visuals, and I think this is most obvious when you're fighting enemies. Some of it is based on Japanese folklore and pulp culture, but the original stuff is really good too. Ugh. Some of the enemies can be a bit silly looking, but others are downright horrifying. Aside from enemies, most of the screens you'll be looking at are very well done. Most of it is unsettling, but there are some moments you'll definitely never forget your first time seeing. Keep that in mind. I'll be going into that later. Going back to technicals, the game is either in 1-bit or 2-bit depending on your choice, and the default color scheme is a very stark grayscale. I mean, it looks like a manga, but if it's too much for you, there's plenty of other colors to choose from. The only real visual effect the game has is when it shows the sort of glitched effect, like when you encounter as well as some other time-shifting enemies. Overall, I think the visuals are easily the best part of this game, and the creator's hard work shows. I mean, look at it. Actually, I think I'm not gonna look at it. This game has sound effects. That's all I can say about them. They provide feedback when you push buttons, but that's pretty much it. I don't mind since the sound effects do their job pretty well. They tell you that something happened, and that's all they need to do. The music is a bit more interesting. The game has a handful of tracks, including the title theme, as well as good and bad endings. They all sound good, but the ones you'll be listening to while you're actually playing the game are also dynamic. In addition to adding extra instruments when you're in combat, the game will also change the tempo and pitch of the track depending on the context. This usually happens when you encounter an enemy or when something truly awful happens. Overall, I think the music does some interesting things, and it lends itself very nicely to the atmosphere. And more importantly, it doesn't grate on your ears, even after several listens. That's about it for audio. It does what it needs to, and I guess you can't really ask for more than that. Before we get into gameplay, a lot of what I'll be showing will have spoilers in it, so if you want my final thoughts, skip to here. With that out of the way, let's get started. Starting out, you have a few options to pick. Your first option is a single mystery, which is basically a tutorial mode. The second option offers an easier experience with very little customization to worry about. The rest of the options are pretty self-explanatory. There are about a dozen characters you can play as, but most have to be unlocked by completing achievements. After you pick a character, you also get to pick an old god. There are 4 available at the start, and 3 more unlockable at the time this video was made. These old gods will influence everything in the game, so choose wisely. If you play with the spider god, get used to seeing this bite injury. After a little bit more setup, you're finally ready to start a run. The goal of the game is to complete 5 random mysteries out of a pool of 20. Completing each mystery will give you a key. Get all 5 keys, and you'll be able to go into the lighthouse and stop the old god from destroying the earth. Before I get into how mysteries work, I want to talk about some of the resources you have to work with. Everything you do revolves around 3 stats: stamina, reason, and doom. Stamina and reason are basically your 2 health bars. If either one of them drops too low, it's game over. Your doom is a timer to how long you have before the game ends. Pretty much everything you do will advance this timer, and if it hits 100%, the old god will return, and it's game over. There's not a lot of ways to reduce your doom, so you have to pick your actions wisely. The majority of your time will be spent trying to balance these 3 stats against each other. Do you take risk to keep your doom low at the cost of your stamina and reason? Or do you play it safe and risk running the clock? It's a fun challenge, and the game's not shy about pushing you to the brink of death. In addition to your 3 main stats, you also have 6 more RPG-like stats, like strength, dex, perception, and so on. They can influence how good you are with weapons and items, but their real purpose is to influence how good you do during events. Okay, back to mysteries. Mysteries are usually composed of several investigations ending in some sort of final confrontation, whether that's a boss fight or something else. Each mystery has several endings depending on what actions you take, though this usually just means completing the side quest to get the best ending. Investigations are simple. You can investigate any location, but the game will tell you where you need to go in order to advance the mystery. When you investigate, you'll either flip an event card or an enemy card. Events generally have a couple options to pick from that test your different RPG stats. Sometimes the event cards will just straight up punish you. Very, very rarely will you get a guaranteed good outcome. Most of the game's content is in these event cards, and which ones you get depend on your character, your old god, and what location you're at. Combat in this game is pretty simple. You have actions you can take that are grouped into 4 categories: offensive, defensive, support, and spiritual. Each action takes a certain amount of time, and you combine actions you can take to fill up your timer. Once your actions are executed, the enemy will attack, or in some cases special attack, and then the next round will begin. You can also cast spells as often as you want in combat, as long as you can afford to cast them. Here's the thing, I didn't find much reason to do anything other than spam attacks in combat. The best way to avoid taking damage is just to kill the enemy as fast as you can. So there's not much to combat, but that's not it. There are several types of enemies in this game, one of which is the ghost type. And unless you're playing a certain character or decide to start burning money, the only way you can kill these things is by finding the right prayer. A prayer is a sequence of claps and bows that you basically have to guess to figure out, or just follow this flowchart. Once you find the correct prayer, it'll work on every other ghost in the playthrough. The thing is, it can take several turns to find this prayer sequence, and the ghost is attacking you the entire time. Ghost combat turns into this slog of trying to find sequences and then taking damage. Basically, I don't think combat is very engaging. Problem is, I find it very easy to start skipping through events once I've seen everything, and if the combat's not very engaging, then there's no real reason for me to keep playing other than to achievement hunt and see new stuff. I don't really have a solution for how you could solve this problem. Just keep in mind that it might get stale after a while. And that's pretty much it. The challenges are fun, but only a couple of them really add anything to the game. Like Mimi's project, which turns her into a psychopath. There's really not much of a story to talk about other than the self-contained mysteries. The atmosphere in this game is great, but your time spent playing will depend on how long you find it interesting. That said, I can easily recommend this game, even if you find the combat mind-meltingly boring. Hopefully the 1.0 release won't make this review too irrelevant. Up next is Faith, hopefully before Halloween. Thanks for watching.